They worshipped in smoke, whispered to gods through leaves, and vanished from history. But what if their sacred plant was the same we'd banned in our lifetime? Across ancient temples, fire altars, and jungle shrines, forgotten civilizations used cannabis not for escape, but for transcendence. This isn't a tale of modern marijuana. It's a lost history of rituals, mystics, and burning saints. Journey into the sacred roots of a plant the world tried to erase, and what secrets did they inhale? Chapter 1. Smoke beneath the Ziggurats, cannabis in ancient Mesopotamian rituals. The night crept slowly over Ur, wrapping the temple in a hush as the desert winds softened. Torches flickered at the base of the ziggurat, casting long shadows across the stone steps. The scent of crushed reeds, burnt cedar, and something earthier drifted in the warm air. That scent was older than the bricks, older than the priests, older even than the gods etched in clay tablets. It clung to the skin of the chosen few who ascended the sacred stairs. Among them was a young acolyte named Enlitai, her heart pounding as she followed the silent procession upward. Above, where the gods were said to dwell, a chamber waited, walled in incense smoke, flickering with firelight, guarded by rituals no outsider dared approach. Tonight was not for prayers alone. It was a night of opening. Enlitai did not yet know what that meant. She only knew the smoke made her feel strange, and that strange was exactly what the gods desired. Inside the chamber, the air was thick. The moment she stepped through the veil, it wrapped around her, warm and heady. Her vision softened, not from heat or fatigue, but from the smoke itself. A brazier in the center glowed with coals, and a priest silent, aged, his head shaved bare, tilted a small stone vessel into the fire. The resin crackled, releasing a sharper scent that burned the throat yet opened the mind. Her training had never explained what was inside. The plant was never named, only prepared, ground with oils hardened into incense, smoked in silence. She inhaled because the ritual demanded it. Her limbs loosened, the room shifted. She saw the god, not with eyes, but with something deeper. Behind her lids, behind the pulse in her ears, shapes stirred. The god of vision, they said, often appeared this way, not as a statue but as light in smoke, as knowing without speech. Enlitai trembled, but she did not turn away. Outside, the city slept beneath constellations named by men long dead. But inside the ziggurat, another world had opened. The priests moved with slowness, each gesture deliberate, designed to echo the unseen. At the heart of the chamber stood the sacred urn. It was not gold. It did not shine. It was dark, smooth, worn from centuries of touch. Inside it, the ancients believed, was the essence of the plant that linked earth and heaven. Not grain, not date palm, not wine. This was the green smoke, the breath of the gods. Some whispered that the plant grew wild near the twin rivers. Others believed it had fallen from the stars, a gift wrapped in leaf and fiber. Whatever its origin, it was power. Power that loosened the soul from the body. Power that allowed a mortal to see beyond the veil. Enlitai stood close now, near enough to feel its warmth. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but awe. The stories never called it cannabis. That word would not exist for millennia. They called it shemen, holy oil. They called it cunibu, a name scrawled in cuneiform so ancient most scribes had forgotten its meaning. But the priests remembered. They always did. In temple records buried deep beneath layers of ash and time, rituals were recorded in strokes and wedges. Mix the resin with wine, they wrote. Pour it upon the fire. Sing the song of ascent. Wait for the god to enter. These were not metaphors. To them the god did enter. Through smoke, through breath, through the shudder in one's chest when the vision came. Enlightai knelt as she was taught. Her lips moved without sound. The priest placed a small pinch of the substance on her palm. She pressed it to her brow. The warmth spread like a second heartbeat. The chamber dimmed, then blazed. Not with flame, with presence. She was no longer in UR. The walls melted away. She stood in a garden of stars. Trees grew upside down. Rivers flowed upward. And at the center stood a figure robed in flame. Its face was a circle, not with eyes, but with endless turning symbols. It did not speak. It did not need to. The knowing passed into her with terrifying gentleness. She saw her own face aged and dying, then reborn. She saw a field where the sacred plant grew wild, tended by figures whose feet never touched the ground. She saw temples rising, then crumbling. She saw the smoke fade from memory, then nothing, a cold wind, silence. She woke gasping, the scent of cuneiform still clinging to her skin. The priest nodded once. She had seen. That was enough. Her initiation was complete. No one would speak of what she saw. Visions were sacred, and the gods did not allow their names to be spoken aloud. In the following weeks, she returned to the chamber again and again. Not for answers, there were none. Only questions whispered in smoke. Each ritual deepened her sense of separation. She still lived in UR. She still walked its streets, past its markets, but her mind had been marked. The gods did not visit lightly. They left traces. The priests taught her to mix the resin, to read the signs left in rising plumes, to lead others into the haze. She watched farmers stagger from the ritual chamber with tears in their eyes. Merchants collapse to their knees in gratitude or terror. The smoke worked differently for each, but it always worked. The gods always came, or perhaps they never left. Perhaps the smoke only made them visible. When the elders spoke of the end times, they warned that the gods would vanish, that their breath would no longer rise. Enlightai now knew what they meant. Centuries would pass. Empires would fall. Names would change. But the rituals continued, hidden, protected by secrecy. The world outside grew sharper, more ordered, less enchanted. Kings demanded gold, not visions. Scribes recorded laws, not dreams. But beneath the ziggurats, the smoke still curled. And cannabis, though never called such, remained the vessel. The sacred plant survived fires, floods, and conquest. In hidden jars buried with priests, seeds lay dormant, waiting. Even as foreign gods arrived, even as temples fell, someone always remembered. A woman with silver in her hair. A man whose dreams still echoed with the Garden of Stars. The rituals could be forgotten. The names could be lost. But the plant had memory. It grew where it was needed. It whispered when silence grew too loud. Called to those who listened. And for a time, in the early days, humanity had listened closely. Enlightai had learned that, and she never turned away again. Modern historians, digging through ruins, found the remnants, burnt vessels, traces of oils, clay tablets with strange symbols. For years they dismissed them. Incense, they said, perfume, nothing more. But then came the deeper analysis, the molecular traces, cannabinoid residues in altars, chemical fingerprints that refused to be erased. Suddenly, what had been myth took form. The plant they called cannabis had been there all along. Smoked, burned, inhaled, praised, not as escape but as doorway. It rewrote everything. What if the earliest religions were not merely symbolic? What if they were pharmacological? What if divine contact had always needed a catalyst, and the plant was that key? The idea was not welcome. Scholars resisted, but the evidence grew. Enlightai's world returned, not in dreams, but in data. And the smoke that once filled sacred chambers now drifted through sterile labs. Still holy, still mysterious, still powerful enough to make even science stop and listen. The gods of Mesopotamia faded into textbooks. Inanna, Enki,
Nannasin.
their stories now live in footnotes and museum plaques. But once their names were carried in breath, in the inhalation of sacred fumes, in the green resin burned with reverence. The plant was a prayer, a sacrifice, a bridge. The priests never called it addiction. They called it communion. There were dangers, yes. Visions could turn dark. Some never came back. But that was the risk of seeing too clearly. To walk with the gods meant losing part of yourself. Enlightai had seen others break. She had helped them return, and sometimes she envied them, for they had touched a truth too sharp for daily life. The rituals guarded that truth, held it like flame cupped in the wind, and when the Ziggurats crumbled, when the gods fell silent, only the plant remained, growing in cracks, waiting to be remembered. Enlightai lived long, they say. She became high priestess. She taught others. She guarded the urn. But near the end of her life, when her hands had grown too weak to prepare the resin, she passed on the final vision, not to a priest, not to a scholar, but to a child who wandered into the temple on a night of storm. The child had seen the smoke rise and followed it, barefoot and curious. Enlightai, eyes dim but mind sharp, guided her into the chamber. Together they lit the brazier. Together they inhaled, and the child saw, just as Enlightai once had, the garden, the stars, the god with the circle face. The knowledge passed. That was all it ever took. One witness, one breath. The ritual was not a thing of stone. It was a seed, and it had just been planted again. Some say Enlightai's bones were buried with the urn. Others say she disappeared, walked into the desert and was never seen again. But wherever she went, the ritual followed. In scattered temples across the region, echoes remained. A symbol carved into stone. A vessel shaped just so. A story half remembered by an old woman weaving mats. The signs were there if one knew how to look. And always in the background, the plant continued to grow. In the cracks of forgotten cities. Along the banks of drying rivers. In places too wild to tame. The gods may have vanished from the skies, but their breath lingered in the soil. Enlightai knew that. She trusted it. And now, as ruins crumble and new scholars dig deeper, her world begins to return. Not through conquest, but through memory. through the green smoke once called sacred, through the plant that made gods visible, through the silence that waits for fire. But before we continue, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of long, gentle history. Feel free to tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love what I'm doing here. And in the comments, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your city. I always love seeing our little bedtime crew gathering from every corner of the world. Now, lower your lights. Maybe let a soft fan hum in the background and settle in. Let's proceed with tonight's quiet journey together. Chapter 2: The Green Soma, Vedic India, and the Mystery Plant. The winds howled over the stone ridges of the Indus Valley, sweeping dust across broken shrines and half-buried altars. Somewhere in the twilight mist, a solitary figure wandered, barefoot and wrapped in linen stained by the road. His name was Hashishen, though none had called him that in years. He was a seeker, not of gold, not of conquest, but of the drink of gods, the sacred Soma. The scriptures he had memorized spoke of it in riddles, an elixir that brought immortality, light, vision beyond death. But the recipe was gone, lost or hidden. Still, whispers told of a green plant, brewed in secret, passed between mystics. They said it opened the crown of the skull and let the universe spill in. Hashishen was not the first to seek it, but he was ready to go further than most. He had given up his name, his village, even the language of his childhood, all for a taste of that which once made men divine. At the edge of a crumbling hilltop temple, he found her, an old woman draped in garlands, her body painted in ochre and ash, her eyes yellowed but steady. She sat before a fire that did not warm, surrounded by bowls and herbs. Hashishen approached without words. She did not speak either. She simply gestured to the ground, and he sat. From a pouch of twisted leaf, she withdrew a bundle wrapped in silk. Inside was a dark resin, sticky and pungent. She crushed it with a stone, mixed it with milk and honey, stirred it until it frothed. Then she passed him the cup. He drank slowly, every sip thick and bitter. His tongue burned, his throat closed, but then it opened. Not just the throat, his chest, his lungs, his mind. The fire shifted, the sky bent. He fell backward into stars. The woman did not move. She had seen it before. The drink was old, much older than Hashishen's need. They called it Soma in the Vedas. That much was clear. But what it was, no one agreed on. Some said it was a mountain mushroom. Others said it was a flower that bloomed only under lightning. But others, quiet ones, believed it was the sacred cannabis. Crushed, brewed, thickened with spice. The drink of sages. The oil of Shiva. The body of the god. Hashishen had once read verses where Soma was described as a green stalk, a giver of delight, a destroyer of falsehood. That matched what he now felt. As his limbs numbed and his mind soared, he heard sounds that weren't there, heard colors, tasted memory. He saw himself as a child, then as an old man, then as something that had no name. The woman whispered prayers, or perhaps she didn't. Perhaps the prayers came from him. The plant was singing, he thought, not words but truth, and it wanted to be remembered. The next morning, his body was wet with dew. He did not know how long he had been lying there. The fire was out, the woman gone. Only the stone bowl remained, with a smear of green still clinging to its rim. He licked it instinctively. The bitterness returned, not strong, just enough to remind him. He wandered down the slope, the rising sun cutting gold through the mist. The valley felt different now, not just in light or sound, but in weight. The world had shifted, as if the roots beneath the land had moved to let him pass. In the villages below, he heard tales of the bang, another word for the plant, crushed into drink, consumed during festivals, used by ascetics and madmen alike. Some revered it, some feared it, but none denied its power. It was said to bring madness if misused, enlightenment if honored. Yaddison had tasted both, and could no longer tell the difference. The deeper he traveled, the more he heard the stories. In hidden caves, yogis smoked the dried leaves before meditation. In mountaintop shrines, priests brewed the plant with ghee and herbs to welcome the gods during sacred days. In royal courts, kings drank it in secret before making war. And everywhere there were songs, verses older than memory, praising the green god. It was not cannabis as the world knows it today. It was a being, a force, a link between form and formlessness, between breath and fire. The ancients did not separate it from worship. It was the worship. Yaddison saw this truth again and again. In the eyes of a child laughing after a single sip, in the trance of a dancing priest lost in smoke, in the silence that followed every ritual, where the air itself seemed to glow. He no longer questioned. He only listened. The plant did not explain. It revealed. He reached the city of Kashala by the third moon, a place once ruled by sages, now by merchants, but the temples still stood. There he met a scholar named Naraka, bent with age but sharp with memory. Naraka showed him palm leaf scrolls, their ink flaking, their language older than any Yaddison had seen. In them, Soma was described as both liquid and light, a thing pressed from green, passed through stone, blessed by fire. Naraka believed it was cannabis, blended with ephedra and poppy, a holy cocktail for awakening. He claimed the Vedic priests used it before every hymn, every offering, every sacred act. Without it, the gods did not come. The plant, he said, was not just substance, it was invitation. The gods were not summoned by word alone. They were drawn by smoke, by vibration, by altered breath. Yaddison listened, drank again, and saw a lotus unfold in the sky. It had eyes in every petal, and it smiled. The rituals grew bolder. In one temple, he was asked to fast for 3 days before drinking. When the cup touched his lips, it tasted of fire and sweetness. His body convulsed. He cried without meaning to. The priests surrounded him in a circle, chanting tones that seemed to rise from his own chest. He saw time collapse, saw ancient cities built in seconds, destroyed in hours, saw a god with a serpent's tongue whisper his name into a stone, then dissolve into flame. Afterward, he could not speak for 2 days, but he smiled. The gods had spoken, or perhaps the plant had. He could not tell anymore. In the sacred stories, there was no difference. The gods were in the plant. The plant was the god. No division, just breath becoming vision, and silence growing a voice. For the first time, Yaddison no longer sought Soma. He had become it. But even in the glow of revelation, there was danger. One night during a festival, he drank too much. The brew was stronger than usual, the color almost black. He danced until he collapsed, then dreamed of a void where even sound could not survive. Place beyond light, beyond thought. He awoke in sweat, unable to breathe. The old woman appeared again, not in flesh, but in vision. She knelt beside him and placed her hand on his chest. The breath returned. Slowly, with each inhale, he saw leaves curl and unfurl in his mind. He realized then that the plant gave but also took. It demanded respect, ritual, rhythm, not consumption but communion. Those who abused it were lost, not punished, just forgotten. He vowed never to drink again without purpose. The gods had rules, and the plant enforced them with mercy disguised as terror. From that day he treated every sip like fire. Years passed. His beard grew long. His eyes turned inward. Villagers began calling him Rishi, seer. He did not deny it. He lived outside cities now, beneath trees by rivers. People brought him gifts. In return, he taught them what the old woman had taught him: how to prepare the brew, how to listen to the visions, how to find silence after revelation. He never claimed the plant was only cannabis. Perhaps it was more. Perhaps it changed shape depending on who called it. But he knew this. The sacred drink still worked. The gods still came, and their voice was green. Across the land, others rediscovered the ritual. In festivals of holy, bang flowed. In Shivaratri, ascetics smoked to touch their god. The plant was everywhere, hidden in plain sight, forgotten yet remembered, sacred yet feared, alive. Eventually, the empire shifted. Foreign rulers arrived. They brought new gods, new laws, new fears. Slowly, the sacred plant was stripped of its divinity, called wicked, called criminal. The rituals vanished underground, but the memory survived. In whispered stories, in folk songs, in the taste left on the tongue after a cup of bang. Yadison watched it happen from a distance. He was old now, silent, waiting. He had seen the rise and fall before, knew it was only a breath in the life of the plant. The gods do not die, he once said to a tree. They sleep. The plant would return. When the time was right, when the thirst for vision outweighed the hunger for power, when someone somewhere drank not for escape but for truth. One morning, just before his final breath, Yadison prepared the brew once more. He sat beneath a banyan tree, the sun bleeding gold across the ground. Alone, he drank slowly, savoring every sip. The world faded. The stars returned. The old woman stood before him again. She smiled. Behind her, the gods assembled, not as forms, but as colors, sounds, warmth. They welcomed him, not as a seeker, not as a priest, but as a leaf on the same stem, a drop in the same brew. His body fell silent beneath the tree, but his breath lingered, fragrant and green. Some say the plant grew wild where he was buried. Some say his cup was never found. But those who drink with reverence still speak of a vision, a whisper in the steam, a man with gold eyes, smiling from within the cup. They call it the gift of Soma, the green god's final memory. Chapter 3: The Hashishen's Secret, Sufi Mysticism, and the Cannabis Brotherhood. The mountains of Persia rose like teeth against the sky, jagged and white-capped, sheltering secrets far older than the empires they had seen fall. Somewhere among those silent peaks stood a fortress. not one of conquest or gold, but of silence. Smoke curled from a single chimney, the scent of spices, cedar, and something darker drifted down the slopes. This was not a place for armies. This was a refuge for seekers, for outcasts, for the few who still remembered how to listen. In the courtyard beneath the watchtower, a man knelt, his hands stained with soil. His name was Idris, though that was not the name he had been born with. He had come from war, from the wreckage of cities and the screams of the dying. He had wandered for years with a sword at his hip and no purpose left, until he found this place, or rather until it found him. The Brotherhood did not advertise. It waited for those who were ready. The initiation had not been what he expected.
No blade, no chant, no bow.
Only a bowl, shallow, carved from olive wood. In it, a thick, black resin, bitter and sticky. He had been told to eat it slowly and then wait. The silence that followed was louder than any battle. First, nothing happened. Then the ground opened, not in the way of earthquakes or dreams, but in thought. His memories rose like smoke, his crimes, his regrets, his grief. Then a wave of warmth that did not comfort, but cleansed. The resin, he would later learn, was hashish. Not the drug peddled in alleyways, but the sacred form, prepared with oils, blessed with breath, used only in the presence of the divine. The Brotherhood called it the veil, a key to the place between, a gate to the real. Idris wept, not from sadness, but from recognition. The fortress was not a place. It was a mirror. The plant had shown him who he had always been. The Brotherhood's origins were lost in layers of rumor. Some claimed they were descended from the assassins of Alamut, the feared order who had once haunted caliphs and kings. Others whispered they were a Sufi sect exiled by orthodox leaders. But those who joined never asked. They simply stayed. The teachings came slowly, passed in riddles, in movement, in the way one stirred the fire or folded cloth. The hashish was central, not a crutch but a compass, taken only in ritual, only when the heart was still. The Brotherhood believed the divine could not be taught. It had to be felt, and the feeling was hidden beneath layers of illusion. The resin stripped those away, not gently, like fire strips bark, but beneath the pain was clarity. Idris had never known clarity. His life before had been noise. Now, in the stillness, he began to hear the song. Came not from outside, but within, and it always came after the smoke. At night, the Brotherhood gathered beneath the stars, not to pray, not to preach, but to whirl. Their bodies spun in perfect circles, arms outstretched, feet firm in the earth. The stars spun with them. Idris learned to move without thought, to breathe in rhythm. Before each dance, a brazier was lit. Hashish, ground with cinnamon and myrrh, was placed upon the coals. The smoke thickened, sank low, then rose like mist around their ankles. It entered without force, through breath, through skin. The dance began slowly, then faster. The smoke did not intoxicate. It aligned, tuned the body like a stringed instrument. Idris lost himself, then found something deeper in the loss. Not joy, not sorrow, stillness. The Brotherhood called it the real, not a place, a state, one step beyond thought, two steps beyond self. The hashish did not create the state. It only cleared the path. The rest was surrender. Idris began to understand the role of the plant. It was not worshipped. It was honored, like a teacher too honest to flatter. It showed what was hidden, sometimes beauty, often horror, but always truth. The Brotherhood taught that God had placed tools in the world for awakening. Fire, breath, word, plant. Hashish was one such tool, forgotten by most, feared by many, but for those who honored it, the plant became a bridge. It softened the border between flesh and light, between silence and song. Idris remembered one morning after a deep session. He had seen himself dissolve into dust, had watched the dust turn to flame, had become flame. For hours he could not speak. The others said nothing. They only touched his shoulder. They knew. The vision was his to carry. No two were alike. The hashish revealed what needed to be seen. Nothing more, nothing less. But with revelation came risk. Not all who came were ready. Some took the resin and found only madness. Not from the plant, but from their own refusal to see. The Brotherhood did not turn them away. They were given time, space, silence. Sometimes they returned. Sometimes they vanished. The plant demanded honesty, could not be bribed. Idris learned that during his second winter. He had grown confident, careless. He took the resin alone, without fasting, without preparation. The vision that came was not light. It was shadow, a garden of mirrors that reflected only his failures. He screamed. Days passed before he ate again. When he returned to the group, no one rebuked him. They did not need to. The lesson was his. From that day, he never touched the resin without intention. It was not a potion, not an escape. It was a gate, and not all gates should be opened in darkness. As Idris grew older, he began to guide others. Wanderers, exiles, poets. The Brotherhood never recruited, simply waited. Those who were drawn to the mountain carried a question. Idris did not answer. He offered the bowl. He watched their eyes. He held their hands through the tremors. Some fled. Some laughed. Some wept for hours. One man recited poems for 3 days without sleep. Another fell into silence so complete it echoed. Each journey was sacred. The hashish did not reveal a god in the sky. It revealed the divine in breath, in silence, in the pulse behind the ribs. Idris taught them to listen, to honor the plant not with reverence, but with readiness. He never called it cannabis. The word was too crude, too modern. It was simply the resin, the breath of the earth, a memory carried in leaves, a message written in smoke, passed down through fire. News of the Brotherhood spread, quietly, in Sufi circles, in whispered tales, in poetry smuggled across borders. Most dismissed them as mystics, or worse, as heretics. The Orthodox feared the plant, feared what it unlocked. In courts and mosques it was denounced, but the Brotherhood remained, hidden, rooted. Some believed the assassins had truly used hashish to train killers, but Idris knew better. The killers had stolen the name. The plant had never asked for blood, only awareness. It was not a weapon. It was a mirror. The true danger lay in what it showed. The Brotherhood protected that truth, with silence, with ritual, with the slow discipline of breath and dance. Idris once said that the plant could not be explained, only experienced. that even the word vision was too small. What it offered was not sight, it was seeing. The difference was everything. In his final years, Idris ceased dancing. His body no longer allowed it, but he still prepared the resin, still guided, still listened. The fortress had changed little. Stones shifted, fires flickered, but the essence remained. One night, under a sky split with stars, he took the resin one last time. Alone, slowly, with reverence. The smoke curled into a shape he recognized. The face of the man he had once been. The soldier, the killer. They stood in silence, then merged. He understood at last that the plant had not changed him. It had revealed what had always been buried. The divine was not elsewhere. It had waited within. The plant had only pointed the way. Idris smiled, then exhaled. His breath joined the smoke, and the fortress fell silent. They buried him beneath the olive tree in the courtyard. No marker, no song, only a bowl placed beside the roots. New seekers arrived in time. They asked about the old man. The Brotherhood said nothing, only passed them the resin. The silence remained. The fortress still stands, though few know where. But the Brotherhood endures, in hidden valleys, in whispered stories, in the slow, sacred breath drawn over flame, and always in the resin, the black gift, the gate to the real, the God hidden in green. Chapter 4. Among Pharaoh's fragrance, cannabis in ancient Egypt. The sun hung low over the Nile, pouring gold onto reeds and stones as the river whispered through the heart of Kemet. The temple of Isis stood silent at its edge, carved into the sandstone cliffs like a secret. Inside, shadows moved softly, guided by torchlight and smoke. Not the smoke of common fires, but something richer, thicker, sweet and strange. The scent curled around the statues of gods and the painted walls, clinging to the robes of the priestesses who moved in quiet procession. Among them walked Merit-Neith, youngest of the temple acolytes. Her fingers trembled slightly as she carried the bronze bowl filled with resin and oil. This night was her first in the inner chamber, the place where words ceased and incense ruled, the room where the breath of gods was said to live. She did not yet understand the recipe she carried, only that it was old, older than the temple, older, perhaps, than even the gods themselves. The chamber was narrow and high, with stars carved into the ceiling and symbols running down the walls like water. At its center burned the sacred fire, low and blue, fed by coals and herbs known only to the priestesses. Merit-Neith knelt at the edge of the flame. The high priestess whispered a word, then stepped back into shadow. It was time. Merit-Neith reached into the bowl, lifted a small spoonful of the mixture, and let it fall onto the fire. It sizzled, then bloomed. Smoke rose, thick and curling, and with it came a warmth that entered not through the skin but through the spirit. She closed her eyes. Her breath slowed. The scent pulled her down. Beneath memory, beneath thought, in the darkness of her mind, she saw light, soft and green, pulsing like breath. A woman stood within it, with the head of a cow and eyes that held every secret. It was Hathor, they said, or perhaps Isis, or perhaps both. The priestesses of Egypt did not call it cannabis. They had older names: green reed, divine oil, the plant of Batet. It was burned in rituals, rubbed on the skin, placed in the mouths of the dead. Sometimes it was brewed into ointment. Sometimes it was turned to smoke. Always it was sacred. Merit-Neith had seen it used before in smaller ceremonies, but only now did she feel its power. The mixture she had offered was not just scent. It was invitation, a request for presence. The gods did not always come when called, but they noticed. In the smoke she felt something lean close, not hostile, not warm, simply watching. The temple walls shimmered. The air thickened. She forgot her name, her body, time. There was only pulse and vision and the soft green breath of something ancient. When she opened her eyes, the high priestess nodded. The ritual had worked. The gods had answered. Merit-Neith would never be the same. Outside the temple, the world moved differently. Farmers harvested grain. Scribes tallied taxes. Soldiers drilled beneath the hot sun. But inside these walls, another rhythm ruled. Time was measured in cycles of the moon, in the flicker of flame, in the slow rising of sacred smoke. The plant was kept in sealed jars, labeled with symbols no outsider could read. Only the high priestess and her inner circle knew the exact blends. Cannabis was mixed with blue lotus, myrrh, frankincense, sometimes honey, sometimes milk, always prayer. Merit-Neith was taught to grind it gently, to heat it slowly, to let it speak. The plant had voice, they said. If prepared with care, it would sing. If rushed or abused, it would turn silent, or worse, show false visions. The gods disliked falsehood. The rituals were strict. Fasting before use, silence afterward. The smoke was not entertainment. It was passage, a door, and only the worthy could cross without losing their way. As the years passed, Merit-Neith grew skilled. She could blend the oils by scent alone. She could enter trance within 3 breaths. She began to lead rituals, to whisper over the bowls, to guide others into the space between. The visions came more often, not wild or chaotic, but layered and calm. Symbols floating in darkness, rivers of light, faces of gods who did not speak but gave knowing with a glance. She began to believe the smoke was more than sacred. It was alive, not in the way of animals or people, but in rhythm, in memory. The plant remembered things. The roots carried stories, and when burned, those stories rose. She once saw a vision of a child holding fire in her hands, then a flood, then silence. The priestesses said this was common. The smoke often spoke in dreams, told of what had been, what might be, what should be hidden. The gods loved mystery. In death, the plant played its final role. The embalmers used it sparingly, mixed with oils to anoint the body. It was said to preserve not just the flesh, but the spirit's path. The Book of the Dead spoke of journeys through darkness, of trials and beasts and gates. The plant, burned during funerals, helped guide the soul. The smoke was a beacon, a thread between realms. Sometimes the deceased was buried with a small pouch of dried flowers, not for scent, for protection, for remembrance. Even the pharaohs were not exempt. In tombs unopened for thousands of years, jars were found, still sealed, still fragrant. Cannabis residue clung to them, faint but undeniable. The priests of old knew its value, and so did the gods. Merit-Neith often stood at funeral rites, breathing the smoke, eyes half-lidded, guiding the dead with chants and fire. She never feared death. The plant had shown her what waited beyond. It was not ending, it was return. But not all agreed. In later years, foreign priests arrived. From the north, from across the sea, they brought new rules, new gods. They scorned the smoke, called it poison, corruption. They banned the rituals, closed the inner chambers, burned the jars. Some temples complied, others hid their knowledge. The recipes vanished into song, into myth, but the smoke lingered. In quiet homes, old women still burned the sacred blend on holy days. In dreams, young girls still saw green light and heard the hum of forgotten gods. The knowledge never died. It only slept, hidden in ruins, in scrolls misread, in dust brushed aside by careless hands. Merit-Neith saw the change coming. In her final days, she buried a small bowl beneath the temple's foundation. She poured resin into it, whispered over it, sealed it with stone. She said it was for those who would come after, those who would need the breath of the gods again. Generations passed. The temple crumbled. Sand buried the altars. The Nile shifted course, but the bowl remained, and so did the story, passed through families, through riddles, through lullabies sung by grandmothers who smelled faintly of herbs. The plant returned in quiet ways, smoked by mystics, rubbed on wounds, drunk in hidden cups during childbirth. The sacred nature was no longer spoken aloud, but it was still felt. Those who touched it knew something stirred, not pleasure, not escape, something deeper, presence. In the 20th century, archaeologists uncovered jars in tombs, tested the residue, named it cannabis. They were surprised. They should not have been. The ancients had known. The priestesses had told them. The gods had breathed it. Merit-Neith had seen it with her own eyes. And the plant, ever patient, waited for rediscovery. In modern Egypt, the old rituals are gone, replaced by newer forms. But the scent of burning herbs still drifts in certain villages, in back alleys, in courtyards lit by candle and moon. The plant is used for headaches, for sleeplessness, for memory. Some still call it sacred. Quietly, carefully, the law forbids it, but the soul remembers. In dreams, the green smoke returns. In visions, the goddesses walk again, not in golden robes or thunder, but in scent, in the flicker of oil on stone, in the space between breaths. Some say the gods were never real, that they were stories to control or comfort. But the smoke says otherwise. It does not lie. It only reveals. And in its curl, in its hum, there is a presence older than sand, older than pyramids. A breath that does not end. The gods may sleep, but they are not gone. Not while the plant still grows. Merit-Neith's name was never carved in stone. Her face appears on no temple wall. But she existed. Her story is written not in hieroglyphs, but in scent, in smoke, in the soft hush of ritual forgotten by time. She walked the path of the plant, learned its ways, honored its spirit. She showed others how to listen, not with ears, with skin, with silence. Her bowl still lies buried, they say. Somewhere beneath ruins tourists now walk without knowing. It waits, not for glory, for need. The sacred always returns when the world grows too loud, when breath becomes thin, when people forget how to look inward. Then, and only then, does the plant rise again, not with fire, with stillness, speaks as it always has, through scent, through memory, through the breath of a forgotten god, carried on the smoke of an ancient offering. Chapter 5. Fire Temples and Sacred Smoke. Cannabis in Zoroastrian Persia. The sun rose slow and deliberate over the Zagros Mountains, lighting the red stones of a crumbling fire temple that clung to the cliffs like a stubborn relic. From within its circular sanctum, a plume of pale smoke drifted upward, spiraling toward the heavens in lazy defiance of time. Inside, fire flickered in the sacred brazier, tended by hands that moved with purpose shaped by generations of ritual. Among those hands was a boy, no more than 16, who had not spoken in days. His name was Ardeshir, and he had been brought to the temple not to learn, but to remember. The Magi had told him this truth on the day he arrived. His clothes dusted with desert sand and his eyes full of loss. His parents were gone. Taken by war or plague, it didn't matter. The fire temple offered no comfort, only flame. But Ardeshir had come seeking something deeper, a way to make sense of the voice that had begun whispering in his dreams. The temple was unlike anything he had known. There were no idols, no painted gods, only fire, stone, and silence. The priests moved in patterns, slow and careful, as if walking through memory. In the morning they tended to the flame. In the evening they mixed the sacred herbs. On the third day Ardeshir was told to follow. He was led to a chamber lit only by the fire's glow. In the center was a dish of crushed green flowers mixed with resin and oil. The scent was thick and musky, yet sweet, as if the earth itself had been ground into perfume. One of the Magi lifted a pinch of the mixture and tossed it into the flame. Sizzled, then bloomed. The smoke that rose was not ordinary. It did not sting or choke. Curled around Ardeshir like silk. He breathed it in, and in that moment something changed. The world narrowed, his thoughts slowed, and in the smoke he saw a shape form. The figure was cloaked in fire, with eyes that shimmered like polished obsidian. It did not speak, it only watched, and somehow that was enough. Ardeshir felt a tremble rise through his chest. Not fear, recognition, as if something buried had been brought forward. When he blinked, the figure was gone, but the sense of presence remained. That night he did not sleep. He sat beside the brazier until dawn, watching the embers shift like ancient language. The priests said nothing. They only observed. They knew the signs. Cannabis was not merely a tool. It was a bridge. Burned in sacred fire, it opened the gates between thought and divinity. The ancients had used it not for pleasure, but for alignment, for clarity. The Zoroastrian path demanded truth in thought, truth in word, truth in deed. The sacred smoke revealed which of those truths had been forgotten. Ardeshir now knew why he had come. The fire had called him. Over the following weeks, he learned to prepare the mixture. Green leaves dried in shadow, resin scraped from bark, ground with dried ephedra and temple incense. Each combination altered the vision. Some induced stillness. Others invited light. The high priests called the mixture banga, an ancient name whispered in Avestan rituals now forgotten by the outside world. Ardeshir became its keeper. Each morning, he stirred it in silence, allowing its aroma to spread through the halls like memory. When offered to the fire, the banga released a hum, inaudible to the ear but felt in the ribs. The priest said this was how Ahura Mazda spoke, not through thunder or miracles, but through vibration. The smoke was the breath of the sacred. When burned in truth, it showed the path to Asha, the divine order. When burned in pride, it clouded the soul and led to Druj, deceit. Ardashir began to understand that the flame was not just fire. It was judgment. One night, during the winter solstice, the oldest priest performed the grand rite. All lights were extinguished except the sacred flame. The banga was poured onto the coals in thick black handfuls. Smoke rose in columns. The room swam in scent. The priests chanted the gathas, their voices low and rhythmic, blending with the crackling of fire. Ardashir stood behind them, barely breathing. In the smoke, the walls shifted. The air turned gold. The fire grew eyes. He saw the world peel back, saw souls walking across bridges made of light, saw darkness chase them, only to dissolve under the gaze of something vast and bright. The chant grew louder. Ardashir felt himself rising, pulled upward by invisible threads. He saw his mother, her face serene, bathed in flame. She touched his cheek, then vanished. When the rite ended, he collapsed. The priests lifted him gently. They knew what he had seen. Some journeys required falling first. After that night, Ardashir was changed. He spoke less, heard more.
Beurre sent différently.
Wind moved with purpose. He saw the fire not as symbol, but as presence. The banga, once just a mix of herbs, became his prayer. The fire temple was not a place of worship, but a living body. Every torch a vein, every spark a thought. The sacred smoke had opened his inner eye. The priests began calling him Nasu Freed, untouched by decay. He carried the flame to nearby villages, offering blessings to the sick and the dying. The people welcomed him. They whispered that he smelled of cedar and gods. Some feared him, others followed. In time, he was no longer boy, no longer orphan. He was keeper of the sacred smoke. He had become the breath of the temple, and wherever he walked, the fire followed. But change was coming. New rulers brought new laws, foreign scripts, foreign gods, foreign punishments. The sacred smoke was called dangerous. The banga was labeled poison. The temples were stripped of their herbs, their rituals banned. Priests fled or were executed. Fires were put out with iron and shame. Ardashir watched it all unfold. He did not run. He simply gathered the remaining banga, sealed it in clay jars, and buried it beneath the altar. He knew this time would pass. The smoke could not be destroyed, only hidden. One night, before the soldiers came, he lit the final fire. He poured the resin onto the coals. He breathed the smoke in deeply, then sat in silence until dawn. When they arrived, the temple was empty.
No ardesir, no priests.
Only ash, but the scent lingered, thick, sweet, sacred. And in one corner, carved into the stone, a single symbol glowed faintly. The fire had left its mark. Generations passed. The fire temples became ruins. Children played among the stones, unaware of what had burned there. But in certain homes, the rituals survived. Grandmothers mixed herbs into warm milk. Fathers burned strange incense during births. Some called it superstition. Others felt its weight. In hidden valleys, a few remembered the banga. They passed its recipe in song, in gesture, in silence. The Zoroastrian diaspora carried the memory across oceans. In India, among the Parsis, whispers of the sacred flame survived. Some elders still claimed that cannabis had once been holy, plant of vision, of truth, not for escape but for light. And though few believed them, the smoke remained, waiting, listening, in shrines that no longer stood, in breath that no longer knew its origin. The fire had not died, it had simply dimmed. Modern scholars debate the role of cannabis in Zoroastrianism. Some dismiss the ancient banga as myth. Others trace its influence through language, ritual, and buried jars. But for those who have stood beside sacred fire and breathed the smoke with reverence, there is no debate. They have seen. The plant was not separate from the divine. It was the divine offered in humility. The fire did not accept lies, and the smoke revealed what words could not. Ardeshir's legacy is not in books. It is in breath, in stillness, in the scent that sometimes drifts unexpectedly through a forgotten room. Those who know do not explain. They only smile and pass the bowl. The plant continues to grow in the wild corners of Persia, in gardens where it is called by other names. Its shape changes, its name shifts, but its presence is the same. It remembers fire, it remembers song, it remembers the boy who once sat beside the brazier and saw the face of light in the smoke. It remembers the priests who chanted in stone halls long turned to dust. The sacred is not lost. It waits. When the world grows quiet again, when the breath slows, when the fire is lit not for war but for wonder, the plant will speak. And those who listen will know it not as a drug, not as escape, but as the breath of truth rising once more through sacred flame. Chapter 6: Temples in the Mist. Cannabis in pre-Columbian Americas. The mist rolled over the mountain like a soft curtain, swallowing the stone staircases and feathered altars that lay tucked within the jungle. Above it all, a stepped temple rose from the trees like a fossil of forgotten prayers. This was not the land of pyramids the textbooks showed. It was older, wilder. Here, the sky tasted of thunder, and the ground breathed with buried secrets. In the village below the cliffs, smoke curled from clay hearths. Not the ordinary smoke of burning wood, but something heavier, something fragrant, a plant with narrow leaves and a scent that drifted through dreams. The elders called it the green tongue. It was neither feared nor worshipped, but treated as an ancestor, a being older than maize, older than blood. When burned in ritual, it changed the voice, it softened the bones, and in the temples it opened the mouth of the sky. Not everyone was allowed to use it, only those chosen by the dream. The keeper of the herb was a woman named Zilima. Her hut sat on the edge of the village, half swallowed by vines and birdsong. Children avoided her not because she was cruel, but because she knew things she should not. She spoke to spirits. She sang in languages that had not been spoken for generations. Every new moon, she climbed the mountain with her woven pouch and her obsidian bowl. The walk was slow, the air thick. At the top, she would sit in silence. Then she would burn the leaves. The smoke did not rise. It circled. It danced around her until the sky dimmed and the stones whispered. She did not chant. She listened. The visions came like memories from another life. Serpents made of light, trees that breathed, mountains that wept salt. Sometimes she wept too. not from sadness, from recognition. The herb did not show new things. It reminded her of what had always been known. There were no books, no written prayers. The rituals lived in bodies, in movement, in rhythm. The people danced the gods into the earth. And always the herb was near, crushed into powder, stirred into drinks, laid upon coals. When a child was born, a wisp of the smoke was blown across its brow. When the old died, their bodies were brushed with ash from the last ceremony. Zilima taught the young to respect the plant, never to pluck it without speaking. It was said the leaves could hear, and if harvested in silence, they would turn bitter. Some believed the plant had traveled to them on the backs of birds. Others claimed it had always grown here, hidden from outsiders by mist and protection. Either way, it was considered sacred, not because it caused visions, but because it connected them to the source, the thing beneath all things, the silence from which the world had once spoken. The Spanish did not understand. When they came armored and blood-soaked, they saw the smoke and called it devil's breath. They burned the pouches. They crushed the bowls. They silenced the chants. But the dreams continued. The herb, hidden in secret gardens, survived. Zilima died before they reached her village, her bones buried beneath the temple's final stone. Her apprentice, a boy named Token, fled into the forest with her pouch. He became a shadow among the trees, a guardian of the old ways. In time, he found others like him, wandering keepers displaced by fire and crosses. Together, they shared what they remembered. Each had a piece, a gesture, a song, a blend of leaves, and the visions returned, not with fire, but with breath. Token believed the plant could not be erased. It had lived through floods, eruptions, famine. It would live through conquest. Its roots were not just in the soil, they were in the people's blood. Some temples remained, swallowed by vines but untouched. In their darkness, the herb was burned again, not for tourists, not for spectacle, for memory. A handful of elders would gather on sacred days, their faces painted in ash and ochre, their hearts quieted by fasting. They would pass the smoke in silence, and one would speak in the voice of a god. The others would listen, their eyes wide, their minds open. The words were not always clear, but the feeling was a hum, a thrum in the ribs, as if the mountain itself had inhaled. Some called it communion. Others said it was dreaming with your eyes open. The herb did not create the vision. It revealed what had been ignored. When the ceremony ended, they would bury the ashes and cover them with flowers. No one spoke until the sun rose. Then they would descend the mountain and return to their lives, carrying pieces of the vision like seeds. To outsiders, it seemed strange, an herbal practice tucked into an ancient world of gods and sacrifice. But to those who lived it, the herb was never separate from spirit. It was woven into the stories of creation. The gods had chewed the leaves before shaping the sky. The ancestors had burned them before planting corn. One tale said that the first human had been formed from clay and cannabis smoke, that the breath given to them was green and fragrant, and this breath still lived in every person. Token believed this. He said the herb was not medicine, not magic. It was memory, and every time it was burned with respect, the world grew whole again. His children learned the rituals. Not all of them, just enough to keep the flame alive. He told them that forgetting was the only true death. As long as one remembered, the gods would return. The visions would continue. The plant would grow. Modern scholars dismissed it. They called it misidentified tobacco, confused psychoactives, lost context. But the bones of clay pipes told another story. In some sites, residue clung to their insides, faint traces of cannabinoids, unmistakable under the lens of science. The jungles had kept their secret, but not entirely. The herb's presence lingered in medicine chants, in harvest festivals, in the quiet rituals of grandmothers who burned it before birthings and burials. It was not widespread, not dominant, but it never vanished. In hidden corners of Oaxaca, in shadowed valleys of Colombia, in Andean folds where breath is thin, the smoke still curls. Not for intoxication, for contact, for guidance, for love. The modern world had labeled it, regulated it, criminalized it, but the plant did not care. It waited, in soil, in myth, in the lungs of those who still remembered how to breathe in silence. In recent years, the interest returned. Anthropologists came with recorders. Botanists came with microscopes. Spiritual seekers came with longing. Some were sincere, others hungry for novelty. The elders watched quietly. Some chose to speak, others turned away. The herb had no need for fame. It only responded to reverence. A few were invited to join the ceremony, not in the temples which were too fragile, too sacred, but in new spaces, circles of fire, fields under stars. The smoke rose once more, and in it, people saw the shapes they had forgotten. Not visions of grandeur, but of truth, grief, forgiveness, joy without reason. And the people wept, because they had thought they were alone. And now they saw they were not. The breath of the plant connected them, not just to gods, to each other, to the ones who had come before, and the ones who would follow. In one such gathering, an old woman told the story of Zilima, how she had spoken to the mountain, how she had danced with the wind, how her breath had once summoned rain. She said the pouch had never been lost, that it had passed from hand to hand, sometimes hidden, sometimes forgotten, but never destroyed, that it lived now in the hearts of those who still walked barefoot in the fields and burned the herb in silence. She called it the breath of the earth. She said that when the world grew loud, the herb grew quiet. But when the world slowed down, the herb returned, to remind, to heal, to speak again. The fire crackled, and the smoke rose. Those gathered said they saw Zilima in the smoke, her eyes green as the leaves, her smile wide and patient. The ceremony ended before sunrise. No one spoke. They simply breathed, and the mountain breathed with them. The plant was never named in stone. It did not appear in the codices that survived colonization, but it lived in the whispers, the movements, the slow unfolding of breath beneath stars. In the pre-Columbian Americas, it had no single god,
No priesthood,
no law. It belonged to the people, to the wind, to the forest. It was burned not for visions, but for balance. The silence held more truth than words. It healed not only the body, but the space between minds. Those who honored it did not need to explain. They only needed to listen. And when they listened, the gods spoke. Not in thunder, but in leaves. Not in miracles, but in memory. The temples are crumbling. the jungle reclaims. But in certain clearings, beneath certain stars, the smoke still rises. And when it does, those who breathe it feel something ancient awaken. The earth remembers, the plant remembers, and so perhaps do we. Chapter 7: Burning Saints, Cannabis and Christian Mystics of the Medieval Age. The monastery clung to the cliffs like a secret, high above the frost-worn valleys of Central Europe. Its stone walls held back centuries of wind, but inside them burned a stillness deeper than silence. Cloistered behind arches and icons, the brothers moved in hushed patterns, their chants rising with the cold morning air. Among them was Brother Tomas, a man whose face bore the soft creases of long prayer and longer solitude. He was not known for his speech, only for the scent that followed him through the halls, an earthy sweetness laced with smoke and something ancient. In the apothecary cell, he worked with mortar and flame, blending oils, roots, and green herb from a hidden patch of soil behind the kitchen garden. It grew low to the earth, its leaves splayed like open palms. No one asked its name. Some feared it. Others said it was an offering. Brother Tomas simply called it the gift. Each evening, after Vespers and fasting, Tomas would return to the apothecary. He lit no lamp. The firelight from the brazier was enough. The mixture was prepared with reverence: pressed resin, crushed buds, hints of lavender and pine. He placed it upon the coals and let the smoke rise. Not for healing, not for pain, for presence. As it curled toward the ceiling, his breathing deepened. The walls of the cell would soften. The darkness would pulse like breath. And then the visions began. Not dreams, not madness, something quieter, a whisper in the blood. He saw light in patterns, a spinning wheel above his head, a ladder that led into the ribs of the sky. Sometimes a voice called him higher, not with words but feeling. He never climbed, he only listened. The visions were not like those of saints bathed in flames. They were small, deep, like staring into a candle until the world disappears. Tomas did not seek power. He did not seek ecstasy. He sought understanding. His earliest vision came during the Black Spring, when death had filled the hills and the bells never stopped ringing. That night, he burned the herb not for wisdom, but for rest. But the smoke had taken him somewhere else. A garden, drenched in gold. A woman with wings of woven smoke. She held a bowl and offered it without speaking. He awoke with tears on his cheeks and clarity in his mind. After that, he fasted for days before each use. He believed the plant opened a gate, and gates should not be approached casually. He read the words of mystics who spoke of divine light, of the marriage between soul and eternity. But where their texts stopped, the smoke continued. It showed him what ink could not: the pulse of God in silence, the shape of grace between heartbeats, the breath of heaven in smoke. Outside the monastery, the world was shifting. Heresies bloomed. Crusades marched. The church tightened its grip on knowledge, fearing the uncontrolled and unapproved. Healing herbs were tolerated, but visions, those were dangerous. Tomas knew this. He hid his rituals, buried his writings beneath floor stones, spoke only when necessary, but in solitude he became a vessel. The herb carried him deeper than any psalm. He began to see light not as symbol, but substance. He said the divine was not above or beyond, but within, that heaven breathed inside the body, and the plant simply opened the door. Others noticed the change in him. He walked with less weight. His presence calmed the dying. His prayers stilled the storms of the mind. But when asked how, he only said he listened. No one knew he listened through smoke, that the plant had become his chapel, that the divine came not with thunder, but with scent and silence. Tomas was not the only one. Across Europe, in scattered cells and forest shrines, others burned the same herb. Hidden in psalters, encoded in recipes, the knowledge passed between midwives and monks, herbalists and anchorites. They did not call it cannabis. They called it holy smoke, angel's herb, or Mary's balm. It grew in corners of cloisters, tucked between roses and nettle. When dried and ground, it was stirred into wine or scattered over coals before prayer. Some used it to ease pain. Others used it to reach light. The mystics called it a scent, a lifting of the soul. The church called it dangerous. Any tool that revealed the divine outside dogma was a threat. Tomas knew the risk. He had seen others vanish. One friar burned at the edge of the woods, accused of trafficking with spirits. His only crime was hearing voices in flame. After that, Tomas grew more careful. But he did not stop. The visions did not allow it. His final vision came during a snowstorm. The abbey was silent, buried in white. The brothers huddled around the fire, murmuring prayers for spring. Tomas, in his cell, burned the herb for what he knew would be the last time. His hands shook as he prepared it, not from fear, from understanding. He had seen signs, the candle that would not light, the raven that landed on the crossbeam. He breathed the smoke and closed his eyes. This time the vision was not light, but warmth. He felt himself float weightless. He saw the earth from above, spinning slowly, wrapped in blue mist. He saw a garden endless, with every flower he had ever known, and in the center a tree, its branches curled with smoke, and its roots were buried in stars. A voice rose, not loud, not human, just presence. He wept without sound. Then the vision ended. He felt no fear, only completion. He lay down and did not rise. The brothers found him in the morning, peaceful, the room faintly scented with herbs they could not name. They buried him in the garden, beneath the stone he had carved years before. No cross, just a circle within a circle. They said he had been touched by the Spirit. They did not know the full truth, but the scent lingered, and in the days that followed, some brothers began to find the herb growing near his grave. They did not pull it, they let it grow, and when the wind blew just right, the smoke from the kitchen fire carried a note of something sweeter, something older, something sacred. A few recognized it, fewer still understood, but they felt it, and that was enough. In time, Tomas's writings were found. Not sermons, not doctrine, just symbols, spirals, stars, a figure kneeling beside flame. Some scholars dismissed them as madness. Others saw patterns. Those who had walked similar paths recognized the silence behind the ink. The visions did not translate to words, but they echoed in dreams, in music, in the stillness between thoughts. The plant remained unnamed, protected, in shadowed corners of churches, in the cloaks of pilgrims, in the hands of those who still believed that the divine was too vast for walls. The church never canonized Tomas. But in secret circles he became a kind of saint, a patron of the quiet path, the smoking bowl, the unseen light. Those who honored him did not speak his name aloud. They only breathed deeply before prayer, and when the smoke rose, they listened. Today, few remember Tomas, fewer still know his herb, but the mystic thread he wove stretches on, in gardens where the leaves grow wild, in ceremonies cloaked as meditation, in seekers who find silence sweeter than speech. The church has changed, the world has changed, but the breath of the plant remains the same, waiting, watching, whispering to those who listen with the heart and not the ear. Carries no dogma, no law, only presence, only invitation. The saints it has touched left no relics, only breath, only smoke, only the faint memory of something sacred rising through fire. The story of Tomas is not unique. In every age, there are those who step beyond the known and touch the unseen. Some do it with books, others with silence, a few with smoke. The plant does not choose. It waits for reverence, for stillness, for need. It has been called many things: medicine, poison, sacrament, sin. But beneath the names, it remains what it has always been: a bridge, a breath, a green flame curling through the soul's dark night. In Tomas's time, it was feared. In ours, it is forgotten or misused. But in hidden places, where prayer is a whisper and divinity a feeling, the herb still speaks. And those who listen still rise, carried not by fire, but by fragrance.